We're going to start on SAT Practice Test 1. So if you have the big blue book, that's going to be on page 1196, because these tests are, they're backwards in the book. So Practice Test 1 is pretty near the end on page 1196. And we're going to look at a narrative passage for reading comprehension, as well as some passages in the writing and language section. And yes, we do have the link in the chat there if you would like to download that. So SAT Practice Test 1, page 1196 in the big blue book. You can also download the PDF from the link in the chat. So last week, if you remember, we looked at some graph problems. We looked at how graphs might appear in the reading comp and how that is the same and how it's a little bit different from how graphs might appear in the writing and language section. Today, I wanted to take you on a little bit different journey. We're going to look at a narrative passage. Now, again, narrative passages, they're either everyone's favorite or they're everyone's least favorite. If you were to sort of line up the passages on a spectrum in terms of, well, I guess in terms on the spectrum of, just story to fact, we'd have the narrative passages over here, and then we start to move over a little bit with the historical passages into nonfiction, and then maybe the social sciences, and then probably the hard sciences. Now, some of you might really like the passages on the hard sciences because you got your tables, your graphs, your numbers. You can move through that really quickly. Some of you might be a little more confident in moving through stories and characters rather than numbers and data. And that's fine. Either of those are fine. It just has to do with your reading style. What I want to show you today is that even when the evidence is not played out in a graph or in data, there is still going to be evidence in the passages. None of these passages, none of these questions are based on just like how you feel. None of these questions are really up for interpretation. There are a lot of questions that we ask, and probably you've asked in literature classes that are up to your opinion. What characters you sympathize with versus whether you think one character's idea was a good idea or whether the decision was a bad idea. That's great for, for classes where we're actually interacting with literature. This is more just to test your reading comprehension of that literature. You're not being asked how you feel about it. You're being asked what the it is in the first place. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and we can get started on the first passage of SAT Practice Test 1. And please, as you have any questions, the chat feature is there. If there's anything I say that's just confusing or didn't make any sense, throw a hand up and we'll try to get to it as soon as we can. Lots and lots of scrolling here. All right. So our first step, as in all reading comp passages, comes with the blurb. Whether or not it's data interpretation or whether it's hard science or social science, we always want to start with the blurb. And in this case, it does give us some pretty important information. So it does give us the title of the passage, right? The strangeness of beauty is where this comes from. And a lot of times they won't give you more context than that. Sometimes they'll just say, this is the name of the book and this is who wrote it. But here we do have some important information in the blurb. The setting is Japan in 1920. Chie and her daughter Naomi are members of the House of Fuji, a noble family. Okay, so it seems that setting is going to be very important to this story. Um, we're going to be learning about pardon me, if we had just started reading the story without reading the blurb, what I'm trying to say, if we had just started reading the story, we might be confused about some of the social stuff that's going on. But it seems that knowing the where and the when is going to be super important to our understanding. What do we do next? Next, we are going to sandwich the passage. So we're not really reading it yet. We're just kind of getting an idea of the flow. So let's see how it starts. Akira came directly, breaking all tradition. Was that it? Had he followed form? Had he asked his mother to speak to his father, to approach a go-between? Would Chie have been more receptive? Okay, so, and as with a lot of literature, it starts with a question, a sort of premise that throws you right in. Um, some of you guys might be familiar with this, and in movies especially, they'll do this. Sometimes they'll just throw you in the middle of the action, and then you have to flash back and figure out what happened before that. Well, movies didn't invent that trick. That happens in literature as well. So we don't know what's about to happen, but we know that Akira came directly, and he's wondering if he hadn't done that, would Chie have been more receptive? Now, the thing I like to do when I'm sandwiching, I'll circle character names, because sometimes it can get hard to keep track of who's saying what to whom. Okay, so he came on a winter's eve. Some more references to Chie. The maid brought a calling card to the drawing room for Chie. Chie was reluctant to go to her guest. Perhaps she was feeling too cozy. She and Naomi were reading at a low table atop a charcoal brazier. Okay, so all right, now we're getting to the quotes. We're getting to the good stuff. Who is it at this hour, in this weather? Okay, and who is it? We know who it is. It's Akira. All right, so Akira makes his entrance. Akira was waiting in the entry. And then we have what seems like a description of him. And he says, "Forgive my disruption, but I came with a matter of urgency." All right, let's skip ahead to the next time he's talking. I don't want to trouble you. Okay, I have an opportunity to go to America as a dentist for Seattle's Japanese community. But how am I involved? Surely a key question to the passage. Skim, skim, skim. Depending on your response, I may stay in Japan. I've come to ask for Naomi's hand. Okay, so that is key. So we have what's been asked, Keeley. Let's just hop around here a little bit more. Eager to make his point, he'd been looking her full in the face. And then he leaves, makes his exit here. Oh, and then Naomi says something. Back on our girl here. So he's asking for Naomi's hand. And it seems Naomi is down with that. She says, I mean to have him. Okay. Well, we've been dropped into this cliffhanger. I don't know exactly what all the ins and outs of that interaction was, but I have a good idea of who the characters are and what their relationships are to each other. So what are we going to do next? Well, next we're going to start categorizing the questions. And if you remember the questions, and I'm sure you may be sick of hearing this now, but that's good. That means you remember it. The questions are either broad questions, line questions, vocab and context questions, or graph and data interpretation questions. And usually this first one we get is broad, but let's see if that's the case here. Which choice best describes what happens in the passage? Yeah, that you can't really ask a more broad question than that. Hey, what just happened, right? So I'm going to circle that, and I would leave it for last on test day. Number 2 says, which choice best describes the developmental pattern of the passage? So that's asking how the passage develops. What is it that's actually going on? I know I just said the same words in a different order. I didn't actually explain anything. So the developmental pattern is less what happened and more like, hey, what category would you put on this thing? What would you call this if someone had to ask? But that again seems pretty broad. So I would circle number 2 as well. Leave that for last. Number 3 is definitely a vocab and context question. However, we are given 2 different contexts, so that is likely important. But we can answer that right away. Which reaction does Akira fear most from Chie? Or most fear from her? Well, that seems fairly broad, but we are at the bottom of a page. Let's see if there's something connected. And what do you know? There is. Hopefully I've told you guys this trick by now, but the SAT writers are terrible in this way. They love to split connected questions by columns or page. So if you have a broad question, or what looks like a broad question at the bottom of a column or page, wait a minute, you guys? Oh, okay, we're still here. I thought I'd lost you guys for a second there. Okay. Yep, we're good. Sorry about that. Okay, so which reaction does Akira most fear from Chie? Remember this, that they love to split the connected questions. So again, if you come to the bottom of a page and you see what looks like a broad question, you always want to check, just peek at the next page. And lo and behold, what we see here, that there is something connected. So I might even on test day draw an arrow in both directions, since I'm not likely to see those two together. All right, let's look at number 6. In the passage, Akira addresses Chie with, okay, well, that seems like a pretty broad question. Again, we're just being asked about the passage overall and the tone in that. So I would circle that and save it for last. The main purpose of the first paragraph, well, that's a little less broad. That's more of a line question. It's not the line question I would answer first, but it's at least a little more specific than these broad ones. As used in line 2, form most nearly means. Okay, clearly a vocab and context question, right? Why does Akira say his meeting with Chie is a matter of urgency? Well, right away, we know this is a line question. We can answer that earlier than some of those other broad ones, especially because we see that number 10 is connected to it. It's asking for the best evidence to the previous question. All right, and it looks like that's all we have for this first passage. So with no small amount of difficulty, we have read the blurb, we have sandwiched the passage, and now we've gone through our helicopter view of the questions. Now we just want to answer them in the order that we've categorized them, starting with vocab in context. So if we start with our vocab in context, we're going to be at, yes, question 3, asking about this word directly, used in lines 1 and 65. So let's see how it's used there. The first one we saw already. Akira came directly, breaking all tradition. Okay. How's it used in, and we see in the context here, he didn't use a go-between, right? So that seems fairly connected between these two ideas. But let's look at line 65. Okay, and read this whole paragraph here. We have an understanding. Please don't judge my candidacy by the unseemliness of this proposal. I ask directly because the use of a go-between takes much time. Okay, so he did not allow anyone to sort of mediate for him, right? Intercessory. If we want to think of words that we could replace directly with, he's coming himself. He's coming without any assistance, without that go-between. So now that we have a good idea of what directly means when it's used here, well, frankly, it just means that, he was being very direct in terms of what he was saying. But while that may be true, that's not what it means in those contexts. I don't think confidently really has to do with it either. It's more about this go-between, right? There's no mediator. There's no one in between. So you can see how all of these might work for directly in other contexts, but only without mediation is going to follow what directly means in that context. So let's look at the next vocab in context question. Number 8, as used in line 2, form most nearly means what? So it's in line 2, all the way back to the start here. All right, had he followed form? Well, you know what I like to do? Cross it out and ask how we could replace it. Had he followed form, had he asked his mother to speak to his father to approach a go-between, would Chie have been more receptive? So form here seems to be, well, again, he's breaking tradition. So tradition actually seems to mean the same thing as form. Had he followed tradition, had he asked his mother to do all these things. So that's the tension here. Yeah, form just means the same thing as tradition, what is traditionally done. So what most nearly means tradition here? Well, appearance, no, that could mean form in other contexts. Custom, yeah, that seems like our money shot. Structure and nature might work in other contexts, but not here when we're talking about Japanese custom. So what do we want to work on next? Next, we want to tackle our line questions. A lot of these are broad. However, number 4 and number 5 are connected. So if you remember, we always use the second one to answer the first one with that double elimination. So what reaction does Akira most fear from Chie? So we know this has to do, if we're going to highlight our keywords, I would say fear and Akira and Chie. And it has to do with Chie's reaction. Okay, now we know the answer is somewhere here in number 5, and we know it's going to have something to do with these keywords. So let's start with line 33 and see if it has anything to do with Akira's fears. Line 33, starting with his voice and ending with refined. His voice was soft, refined. No, I mean, that's a sweet description, but doesn't really have to do with Akira's fears. Lines 49 to 51, starting with you and ending with mind. Let's just underline this. 49 to 51. You know how children speak so earnestly, so hurriedly, so endearingly about things that have no importance in an adult's mind. Well, I mean, that's more of just a take on childhood. It doesn't have to do with Akira's fears. And if we read a little further, that's how she viewed him. That's talking about Chie's views of Akira, not Akira's fears regarding Chie. It's all about her view, not his. So I don't like B. Lines 63 to 64, starting with please and ending with proposal. Please don't judge my candidacy by the unseemliness of this proposal. Okay, so this has to do, who's saying this? We know it's Akira, right? And what he's asking Chie to not do, what he's fearing that she will do, is to judge his candidacy, basically to consider whether or not he is a viable candidate to marry her daughter. And he's saying, I know my proposal, we've talked about this, it's direct, it breaks custom, it's unseemly, but please don't judge that. Please don't make your decision about whether or not I can marry your daughter. So I like that best so far. Let's see if option D has anything better. 71 to 72, starting with eager, ending with face. Eager to make his point, he'd been looking her full in the face. Again, an interesting detail. He's eager, but we don't see any emotion of fear, as we see here. Fear of a specific reaction. So we have what we need from number 5. Now it's just going to be a matter of plugging that in to what we know about number 4. And again, what did we say was true about this? He's afraid that she won't accept the proposal because of the way in which he's proposing. So what does he worse fear? He fears that she's going to say no, that she's going to say, no, you can't marry my daughter. That she will consider his proposal inappropriate. Well, he definitely references that, right? I know it's unseemly. She will mistake his earnestness for immaturity. Well, it seems that that is something definitely going on in Chie's mind, but it's not something going on in Akira's fears. She will consider his unscheduled visit an imposition. Will she think that he's imposing? That doesn't seem to be, that's a little more specific, right? Than what we find in here. He doesn't say like, I know I'm imposing. He says, I know this isn't how things are usually done, right? Let's flag that one, but I don't like it as good as A, honestly. D, she will underestimate the sincerity of his emotions. Well, no, I don't think we get that at all from here, right? Remember, we're just finding it from this evidence. This isn't a graph. These aren't numbers and tables, but this is evidence. We have to find a clear connection. And I don't see that here. And really, if I'm honest, the imposing is just a little too specific. This is where we want to go. Don't think just because something says it a little fancier that it's the right answer, because often those specifics are what get you in trouble. Okay, what else do we have here in terms of line questions? The main purpose of the first paragraph. I think we can tackle that now. The first paragraph is pretty short. What is the main purpose? Well, let's look at it. Akira came directly, breaking all tradition. Was that it? And he followed form. Had he asked his mother to speak to his father, to approach a go-between, would Chie have been more receptive? Okay, so Akira is, well, maybe Akira is not questioning it, but the narrator is certainly looking at the way Akira went about a certain interaction and saying, you know, it went down a certain way, and maybe it would have gone down differently had he been more traditional, right? Let's see what we have here. So is it to describe a culture? Is it to describe a culture? No, I wouldn't say so. Like, we do end up getting like a bit of a description, but I don't think that's the main purpose of what we're looking at, right? To criticize a tradition. Well, no, he doesn't say that like Akira broke this tradition because he thought this tradition was dumb. Like there's no criticizing here. There's just weighing the pros and cons of his decision. C, to question a suggestion. Well, I don't think anyone suggested anything in this paragraph. Yeah, that's not in here. If we were questioning a suggestion, we might find words like, "Oh, Akira should have never taken his friend's advice," or Akira wondered, should he have done this based on the suggestion of his mother or whatever. You know, like this is just talking about Akira's views and his actions. To analyze a reaction, well, yeah, I think we're analyzing Chie's reaction and if it would have gone down differently. I am going to pause this for just a second, but I just got to blow my nose. But if you want to throw anything in the chat while I'm doing that, if anything's not making sense so far, please don't hesitate. So hopefully you see by now that even though the evidence in these narrative passages is not related to, to numbers and data, that doesn't mean there are no direct answers in narrative fiction. There are. There are things that are up for interpretation in narrative fiction, but those aren't the kinds of things that the SAT is going to be asking you about. The SAT isn't going to be asking you about whether you think the Great Gatsby was a good person. The SAT will be asking you, what does Gatsby most want in this scene? What does it seem like Nick Carraway wants from Gatsby in this scene? That sort of thing. Things that have direct answers in the passage are what the SAT is asking about. What line questions do we have left here? 9 and 10. Why does Akira say his meeting with Chie is a matter of urgency? Okay, as used in line 32. So let's just look at that in the original context. Forgive my disruption, but I come with a matter of urgency. Okay, so the line itself doesn't actually give us much information. But we have this linked question down here. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? So we know it's going to have to do with the urgency of Akira's meeting with Chie. If it's not about those things, we're not interested. So line 39, starting with I don't and ending with you. I don't want to trouble you. Okay, that doesn't have to do with the urgency. Like if he didn't want to trouble her, then he wouldn't. But we want evidence of urgency. Lines 39 to 42, starting with normally, ending with community. Normally, I would approach you more properly, but I've received word of a position. Okay, that's not a deal breaker. So he has this opportunity to go to America. So I would flag this, but it's not a clear winner to me yet. 58 to 59, starting with depending and ending with Japan. Depending on your response, I may stay in Japan. I've come to ask for Naomi's hand. So ending with Japan. Yeah, that may work. But clearly I don't think it's as good as C. Like this is just more about why he wants to ask her. It's not really about why it's urgent. So I'll flag C. I won't cross it out just yet. Line 72 to 73, starting with IC and ending with U. I see I've startled you. No. He's surprised Chie. That doesn't have to do with why this meeting is urgent. Well, here's the part where we might actually have to go hunting for a little bit of context. How does this whole conversation play out? Quotes are often very, very important. So we've basically read everything up to this. I may stay in Japan. I've come to ask for Naomi's hand. We have an understanding. Please don't judge my candidacy by the unseemliness of the proposal. We've read that already. On test day, you won't even have to reread that. I asked directly because the use of a go-between takes much time. We've read that too. Either method comes down to the same thing, a matter of parental approval. If you give your consent, I become Naomi's Yoshi. What is that? Oh, we have a little asterisk. See this? Sometimes this will happen, especially with more culturally specific passages. So Yoshi is a man who marries a woman of higher status and takes her family's name. Okay, so Akira is clearly marrying up. Will live in the house of Fuji. Without your consent, I must go to America to secure a new home for my bride. Okay, so he's gonna marry Naomi either way. Either with the consent of Naomi's parents, living under her name and her household, or without her consent in America, without her parents' consent in America. So now we sort of see, and either way, we know that Naomi's for it. She's going to marry this guy too. Her heart's set on it. So why is this urgent? I think it's urgent because the position came up. He was offered a job. It's not urgent because of Chie's answer as much. That's definitely why he wants her opinion, right? But we're specifically looking for why this thing has to happen now. So with that in mind, with this line in mind, seeing that he's gotten an offer for a job to serve as a dentist for Seattle's Japanese community, fixing teeth in the US of A. What's going on in number 9? What's our answer? Is it that he fears that his own parents will disapprove of Naomi? No, we don't hear anything about Akira's parents. He worries that Naomi will reject him and marry someone else. He shouldn't be worried about that. He's been offered an attractive job in another country. Ding, ding, ding. He knows that Chie is unaware of his feelings for Naomi. Well, we don't really get that one way or the other, right? It's a matter of evidence. We have to find something that has a clear connection. Now, let's see what we have left. Now we have our broad questions, and I think we're ready. I, for one, think we can take this on. Number 1, which choice best describes what happens in the passage? Well, we have a pretty good idea of what happens in the passage. So let's see what matches our description, right? Akira comes to the house, he breaks tradition, he asks for her hand in marriage. He asks Chie for her daughter Naomi's hand in marriage. Chie doesn't really say yes or no. Akira leaves. The end. So A, one character argues with another character who intrudes on her home. There's not really a lot of argument. Chie just kind of listens, judgmentally for sure. B, one character receives a surprising request from another character. Yeah, I would say this is a surprising request. I'm going to flag this. C, one character reminisces about choices she has made over the years. No, I don't see a whole lot of Chie or Naomi's backstory. One character criticizes, criticizes another character for pursuing an unexpected course of action. Again, no, like Akira does pursue a weird choice of action, but that's not what happens for most of the passage. Most of the passage focuses on this request. Number 2, which choice best describes the developmental pattern of the passage? Is it A, a careful analysis of traditional practice? No, it doesn't really go like National Geographic on us, breaking down these customs. It's more about the story around the customs. B, a detailed description of a meaningful encounter. Yeah, I like that best so far. C, a definitive response to a series of questions. Now, Chie doesn't give a definitive response to Akira. That's part of what makes this encounter so distressing. D, a cheerful recounting of an amusing anecdote. I wouldn't say it's either of those. An anecdote is just a story that someone tells, but our adjectives are what's going to throw us off here. Cheerful and amusing. There's a lot of tension going on here. Akira is stressed as all get out. Okay, so we've got one more question. In the passage, how does Akira address Chie? Well, that's going to be a little more difficult, right? Now we're being asked questions about tone. And this is probably, it's questions like this that if you don't like the narrative passages, this is going to be why. Because they're asking like all these emotional questions. But just because the question has to do with emotion doesn't mean there's no evidence linked to it. For instance, if we look back at how he interacts with Chie, we see him bowing right here. We see him like asking a lot of forgiveness. He has a deferential peak. You guys know what deference is. It means you're sort of like you're I don't know. It's submission. It's like a social submission. So while he's coming with like a direct request, he is still coming at it with a lot of meekness. He's not coming in here and saying like, "Hey, this is happening, like it or not, lady," because if he felt that way, he probably wouldn't even ask her the question. Please don't judge my candidacy. Like he's speaking with a lot of respect. He's just not following tradition. So does he speak to Chie with affection, but not genuine love? I don't know if that's really appropriate here. He's talking to his like potential future mother-in-law. So I don't think that one's really going to take us where we need to go. B, objectivity, but not complete impartiality. Yeah, I don't know about that one. That's more something you'd expect from a scientist who is really passionate about their work. You'd want them to be objective about what they were talking about, but not completely impartial if they had an opinion. That sounds like something more in a science passage. Not saying that couldn't happen in narrative fiction, but it's not happening here. C, pardon me. C, amusement, but not mocking disparagement. Is Akira amused with Chie? Well, there's not much that Chie does for Akira to be amused by. She kind of opens the door, lets him in, and then sends him home. And certainly, he doesn't even come close to mocking. Now, I know it says not mocking, but like this is sort of, these are fine line terms, right? It's like it's this, but it's not quite this. So this would be like, if someone were looking down on someone else and amused by the immature behavior of a child, but still loving them and not mocking them. I don't think that describes Akira's relationship to Chie at all. Respect, but not utter deference. Okay, well, I think that's key because while we do have the deferential peak going on earlier in the passage, right? If there was complete deference going on here, I doubt he would have come so directly. I don't think he would have broken in. Well, he doesn't break into the house, but you know what I mean. Come in without a go-between, not following any of this tradition. So he respects her, yes. But is he going to let her make this decision for him? Not really. He and Naomi have already made it. So that covers it for that narrative passage. You may, pardon pardon me, you may find these difficult because they don't have that direct evidence that we like so much in the hard sciences and the social sciences. But hopefully you saw that there's still ways to hunt for clues. Even though the information is more emotional, that doesn't mean it doesn't have direct evidence.
Okay, so thanks for watching, and please remember to contact us at info@embracetutoring.com to set up any personalized private tutoring sessions you would like. Stay tuned for future videos, and best of luck with your studies. We definitely encourage you to visit our Instagram as well as TikTok pages if you have any questions along the way. Take care, guys. Best of luck with your studies.